Call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think we should actually, when we get to the subsequent readings of this bill, change this to the kick the can down the road on fluoridation bill. Because, Mr Speaker, we know in this House, as well-informed members of Parliament, that after many decades of fluoridation in our major cities, there is no evidence whatsoever of an adverse health effect caused to the many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in New Zealand who are already drinking fluoridated water and have been doing so for decades now. There is not one shred of evidence that they, as populations, are suffering an adverse health effect from their water being fluoridated. And there is ample evidence from New Zealand and around the world that all of those populations are obtaining a health benefit from better teeth and an economic benefit from lower dentist bills. So, Mr Speaker, upon that basis, why is the government kicking this down the road and adding to compliance costs at a regional level by requiring a separate decision to be taken in every district health board in New Zealand, rather than the government acting in the interests of all New Zealanders and taking the decision that on the basis of science, not witchcraft, not scaremongering, on the basis of science, that we are satisfied that water in New Zealand should be fluoridated. Because that's the choice. The government could today be passing legislation that says all municipal water supplies over a certain, if you want to have a tiny threshold for the tank on the hill that's, that might cost a bit, all large municipal water supplies should be fluoridated. That's what if we weren't satisfied that it was safe for district health boards to say that they can enforce fluoridation, if we didn't think it was safe for them to do so, we wouldn't be letting them do so. Given that we are satisfied that it is safe to give the discretion to district health boards to do so, why can't we just say it's safe for New Zealand populations to have fluoridated water? Why are we kicking this down the road? Well, sir, it's because the government has not got the political courage to protect the interests, particularly of those people who can't afford to go to a dentist if they get rotten teeth. We haven't got a government that is willing to act in the interests of New Zealanders, sir. This adds unnecessary compliance costs. We will see people, some of the nutty people in our society, standing up and running for election in district health boards on a non-fluoridation ticket. That's what this bill is inflicting upon New Zealanders. This bill could go so much further and actually solve once and for all this problem of local unscientific approach to the fluoridation of water. Next will be actually, on this principle, the government will be going out there and saying it's a matter of discretion for the local hospital boards as to whether they let their doctors prescribe antibiotics. How nonsensical would that be? Let's just get on and take a decision in New Zealand that we should be fluoridating water. Now, this is at one level better than the current situation in that we can't even enforce this at a DHB level rather than a council level, sir. But why just can't we take the obvious decision and say that all water should be fluoridated? Sir, at this time, I think we should also consider what would be, this is effectively a form of mouthwash, isn't it? Well, at this time of uncertainty in New Zealand politics, I wonder what would be the approach of different leaders of the National Party to this. I suspect that if it was Bill English, we'd have ye olde-fashioned fluoridation recipe. It would date back to 1990, which is when he came into Parliament in his 20s, and we would be expected to put up with a very old recipe being used again. I'm not sure that's right, sir. I think that there's been a few developments since 1990 and that there must be a better answer for the future of New Zealand than ye oldie-fashioned mouthwash. Of course, Stephen Joyce's his option would be even different. He'd actually just put it out to amongst his friends, and he'd actually want to see, which of his crony capitalist mates would actually help him the most if he introduced some form of support for the sale of mouthwash on a corporate basis. So I think that we'd have the crony capitalism mouthwash if it was Stephen Joyce. Well, Judith Collins, what? Well, she'd import it from China. Acid. Acid, my colleague says. No, it wouldn't be. But I think it would be the Orovida mouthwash, and it would be imported with the assistance of Chinese border officials into the New Zealand market. There wouldn't be much chance for a New Zealand-produced mouthwash to cure this problem. And then, of course, the Westie mouthwash from Paula Bennett. Well, it wouldn't really matter because none of her constituents would get it because they're living in cars without tap water. So that wouldn't be a very suitable solution either, sir. So we'll have to look forward to see. I don't know what hopefully Jonathan Coleman would actually apply a bit of medical rigour here and actually overturn this decision, which, given that he's the Minister of Health, he could have already done this, but you would hope that if he had a little bit more power higher up the tree, he would take a rational, science-based decision and at least say, as a doctor, he was convinced that there was, on the basis of millions of people already having fluoridated water in New Zealand, that there is no adverse health effect from the low doses of fluoride that you need to prevent tooth decay, which are not adverse to other aspects of health. Of course, if you drink pure fluoride, you die. It's a poison in those concentrations. But at the low concentrations that are needed to improve tooth health, teeth health, oral health for your teeth, there is no adverse effect. And if it were otherwise, it would be proven around the world by now, given that millions of people already have been, if you like, experimenting on fluoridated water for decades so far. So I would hope that Jonathan Coleman would take a science-based approach. Obviously he isn't, because this bill, sir, has been through his office and has his support of kicking the can down the road and leaving it to health boards rather than this government showing leadership. And I tell you what, really, after 8 years in government, you do have to conclude that a government has run out of ideas when their idea for fixing the fact that we've got populations that aren't getting fluoride in their water is not to make them put fluoride in their water, but it's to kick the can down the road and leave the decision to someone else, because they are so timid in respect of matters of like this that they won't take the obvious decision and conclude for themselves on the basis of the advice that they've obviously had from the health officials that fluoridation of water does not cause adverse health effects, because if they had that advice, they wouldn't be giving the power to district health boards to fluoridate their water. They've obviously had the advice that there is no adverse health effect on fluoridating water for dental health, and yet they will not say that all population level house supplies ought to be filtered. If there are some people out there who have their own view as to why they think that they are different, I think they're wrong, but of course no one's forcing them to drink the water. No one's forcing them not to filter the water or to distill the water if they're one of those people who has that strongly held view, but they should not allow the interests of this, more than 99% of the population who we can improve the health for by being held hostage by a few people who are being unscientific, bringing forward illogical arguments that are not grounded in fact, when in fact we've had this experiment around the world and in New Zealand for decades, where millions and millions of people around the world are getting the benefit of fluoridation with absolutely no credible evidence that there is an adverse health effect as a consequence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party will be supporting this bill, but it could solve the underlying problem instead of kicking the can down the road to health boards.